Hey, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Stephanie Svisco. I'm the program administrator for the business law section of the Florida Bar, and I'd like to welcome you to course number 4493, Leadership in the Florida Bar's Business Law section. This presentation is, of course, brought to you by the business law section of the Florida Bar. And we've produced several complimentary CLEs over the past year during COVID, and those are all going to be available on our YouTube page. And this one will also be available for viewing and your review afterward if you would like to go to that page within the next week. You can re-watch if you have any questions. We also have several other CLEs that are available for aftermarket purchase on our website. And if you are not already a business law section member, we'd like to invite you to join us. You can do that very easily through the business law section's website, which you can also access through the Florida Bar's business law section page. If you have any questions or you need anything, I am happy to help with that. You can find all of my information on the section's website or on the business law section page of the Florida Bar. So please do not hesitate to contact me if you need anything. The presentation today is 1 hour, and we are going to ask that all questions go through that question and answer box. This is set up as a Zoom webinar, so all of our attendees are automatically muted and your videos will not be seen on the main page, but we are able to see any questions that you put in that question and answer box. We are going to address those questions at the end, and if there are any questions that we don't get to, we can also reach out to you. If you need anything, please let me know. So this presentation is going to be moderated by Utiba Ipe, and she is going to go ahead and get us started. So please enjoy the rest of our presentation.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Like Stephanie said, my name is Utiba Ipe. I am a commercial litigation attorney at the law firm of Milan Budwick in Miami, Florida. This CLE is about leadership in the business law section. Throughout the course of this CLE, you'll hear us refer to BLS, and that is short form for just business law section. We have a great group of panelists here today who have all held leadership positions within the BLS. We have Judge Mindy Mora, who is a bankruptcy judge at the U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the Southern District of Florida. She was the BLS chair from 2011 to 2012. We also have Gregory Yadley, who is currently a partner at Shoemaker. He is the current chair of the Long Range Planning Committee, and he was the BLS chair from 1990 to 1991. We are also very fortunate to have our current chair of the BLS, Leza Blanco. And Leza, if you could just go ahead and start off the conversation for us, can you briefly just tell us what is the BLS and just give us an idea of what type of programming it provides and what kind of benefit it provides for members?
Thank you, Tiva. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CLE. It's a pleasure to be discussing the leadership possibilities of the business law section. The business law section is a section of the Florida Bar. It's a voluntary membership wherein folks who are members of the Florida Bar may choose to participate. Our section, the business law section, is the third largest section of the bar. We have approximately 5,000 members, and we are a section that incorporates all areas of business practice. We have members that span the range of insolvency, bankruptcy, creditors' rights, intellectual property, corporations, you name it, computer and technology. So we have folks that practice in areas that touch all aspects of business law as members of our section. And in connection with membership in the section, we obviously are targeted to areas that affect business law. And one of the most important functions of the business law section is a legislative function. It's our group that essentially watches the legislative process happening in Tallahassee that sets the standards for business law throughout the state. And in many cases, we either might propose legislation of our own that we think is necessary to either normalize our law in the state to other laws around the country, or we seek to propose legislation that perhaps addresses issues that have been raised in courts around the state, Or we also could serve as giving technological assistance to legislators who have proposed legislation that touch the areas of business law that we think might be helpful. So we do act in a consulting capacity at times. And then we also defend against legislation that we think isn't good for the business law community of our state. So those are sort of the legislative components of the business law section's role in the area of legislation. In the area of member benefits, the business law section provides various membership benefits to our members. The most important one being one of an education function. We provide high quality CLEs ranging from all the topics that touch the areas that our members practice in. We do so on a regular basis. We also have committees that are standing committees, substantive and otherwise, that are arranged in our bylaws. And those committees target lawyers who practice in the same areas. And we can talk about those as we go throughout this presentation, but essentially it provides an opportunity for members who practice in the same areas to interact with each other and discuss issues affecting their particular practice. And then finally, we have somewhat of a social function in connection with our meetings, which happen several times during the year, more often in connection with Florida, the Big Bar's meetings. We have an opportunity to get together as a section and cross-network to lawyers of other areas that perhaps are not participating in the same committees that we might be participating in. So that's generally an overview of some of the things that we do as the business law section and some of the membership benefits that we have and we provide. Thank you.
So Judge Minty-Moore, let me go ahead and pull you into this conversation. You have a long history of involvement with the bar. Can you tell us initially what attracted you to the BLS and what has caused you to maintain your involvement?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Although I'd like to point out that my involvement is shorter than Mr. Yadley's involvement. Just want to get that out front there. When I moved to Florida, I was already a mid-career lawyer, and I had lived previously and practiced in states that didn't have an integrated bar. So I had not really gotten involved in the state bar activities in the prior states I was in. But when I moved to Florida, the partner that I worked for, Scott Baina, had been a longtime member of not only the Florida Bar, but of the business law section. I think he served as chair, well, definitely before Mr. Yadley. Sometime I think maybe in the late 80s. Yeah, maybe late 80s. And Scott was a very, very successful lawyer. And I figured that if he thought that bar involvement was good for his career, it probably was going to be good for mine as well. And over the years, as I got more and more involved in the section, I really chose to maintain my involvement at a relatively high level for a number of reasons. First of all, the substantive learning opportunities. You know, when you're a member of a committee within this section, like I was of the Bankruptcy UCC committee, you're really focused on learning intricacies about your area of practice from people who are focused on developing the best knowledge possible. As Leza said, you know, we work on legislation, so you're always sort of on the cutting edge of new laws that are coming into effect in your practice area. In addition, you have the opportunity to really enhance your skills as a lawyer, both the substantive areas that I was talking about, from being involved in new legislation and the like, but also things like leadership skills and speaking skills. I'm going to tell you my own story about that. As a young lawyer, I was incredibly shy and really fearful about speaking in public. In fact, I'm sure that Greg doesn't even remember me as a young lawyer because I chose to be invisible. And one of the reasons why I decided that I had to become a more active member of the section was because I wanted to break out of those bad habits. And they were just habits, really. And so I took the opportunity and forced myself to volunteer to speak in as many live seminars in front of an audience as my committee or the section put on, where I was competent to speak about the subject area. And not only did that cause me to enhance my substantive knowledge, but I really got comfortable speaking in public to the point that now I can sit up on the bench and feel free to yell at lawyers from up on high. The other thing that I want to say about section involvement is not only do you make the professional connections that Leza was speaking about, but on top of that, you are able to really develop long-term friendships with section members that I think really enhance your professional enjoyment of the career that you have chosen. So those are all the things that caused me to not only join, but maintain my involvement at this level over the years.
Thank you for sharing that. Greg, and I know Judge Moore touched on this a little bit, but I've heard a lot of young attorneys say that they don't think that it's appropriate for them to get involved with the BLS because they cannot contribute substantively, that they're not subject matter experts yet. At what stage in your career did you join the BLS, and what benefit do you think it provides for young attorneys?
Well, it's never too early to get involved. It truly isn't. And I encourage everyone on this call to take the initiative to do so. Since I've already been accused of being the token old guy here, I will share my experience, because times really have changed a lot. As with Mindy, I practiced before I moved to Florida, and I worked for the federal government, the Securities and Exchange Commission. I was assistant general counsel at Freddie Mac. Both very significant lawyer jobs, but didn't require me to be involved in the District of Columbia Bar, even though I was a member, and it was just different. I joined one of the oldest firms in Tampa, Shackelford Farrier, which has been merged away over the years. And times have changed a lot since then, because it was almost a requirement for associates to go to the Florida Bar annual meeting. You went with your spouse or a friend, people brought their kids. It was a command performance. And since that time, unfortunately, the importance of the bar has diminished. And one of the downsides of that is that it's now up to you individually to develop those relationships that sort of happened more naturally when I was a younger lawyer in Florida. And these relationships not only enhance your practice, but they enrich your experience as a lawyer. And as Judge Morris said, it allows you to further develop your own personal skills. I think this is particularly important because our practice has, for all of us, become more specialized, more regional or national even, certainly more digital. COVID has expanded that. And we can't assume that relationships will simply develop, or that you'll get noticed, or that you'll be able to distinguish yourself from the crowd. One of the things that the business law section does an excellent job of, in my view, is inclusion. And not just as a social or a cultural issue, but truly we extend an open invitation to lawyers to participate. It was already been mentioned, CLE, which allows you the opportunity to learn, as Judge Morris said, learn from the real cutting edge leaders in your practice, but also to participate, to speak or write, or just help out administratively. And Leza talked about the social aspects. But for hurricanes and COVID, one of our marquee looked forward to events every year is we have a Labor Day retreat. And it's often at a very nice beachfront hotel. Believe it or not, Labor Day is not the best holiday for most hotels because families throughout the country are getting their kids back to school. So we get great rates at great property. As I recall from my baby lawyer stage, people do bring guests, they bring their kids. There's activities ranging from substantive law sessions to practice management sections to the economics of the law section, ethics, and lots of social time to get to meet people and make friends who hopefully will become colleagues. Now, as to how I got involved, it was really complex. I went to a meeting and a guy named Steve Roddenberry, who is a very esteemed corporate lawyer with Ackerman, and at the time he was a little younger, but still a very esteemed lawyer, just invited me to come to another meeting. It was as simple as that. And when I got to the meeting and there was a discussion about a project, he said, "Greg, would you be willing to help on this?" And I said, "Sure." And before I knew it, I was off and running.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Leza, can you, kind of tell us a little bit of your story? Why is it that you joined the BLS and what caused you to want to actually chair the section?
TB, I think if I remember correctly, I actually was one of those that joined the section as a member of the Florida Bar, just brand new member. One of the benefits of being a brand new baby lawyer is you get to select a section of your choice, and they provide the section membership for free in the first year that you become a lawyer and become a member of the Florida Bar. So the business law section was my section from that point forward. Now that's a little different from when I got more involved, because I think that for some years in between there, I wasn't nearly as involved as perhaps I could have been. My sort of real involvement began tied to a leadership role that I had in the Southern District of Florida as the head of the bankruptcy bar. And as a result of that role, I was asked to provide routine updates as to what was going on in the area of the bankruptcy bar in the Southern District of Florida at the BLS meetings. So we would have the bankruptcy UCC meetings that Judge Mora was referring to. And at each of the meetings, which take place every 6 or so months, I would come in and report on the status of what the bankruptcy bar in the Southern District was doing. And in doing that, I actually found that I enjoyed participating in the business law section. I was integrating myself into not just the bankruptcy UCC standing committee, but also in the other committees. And I really truly saw the benefit of potentially doing that in the more long term. One, because my leadership and service to voluntary bar organizations had been fairly localized with my efforts with the bankruptcy bar, and the business law section provided a much broader platform because it's a statewide platform. So I was seeing and encountering bankruptcy lawyers with similar practices, but located in other areas of the state. And I truly saw opportunity there for business development, because in my practice, we encounter lots and lots of conflicts. There are many parties in a bankruptcy case, which yields many opportunities for referring work. And I immediately saw the opportunity for business development in the business law section early on in my involvement. But like I said, it just so happened that I got more and more involved vis-a-vis another leadership role, which I thought was great. And then I integrated by trying to expand certain efforts of the BLS. And one of the efforts was a credit abuse resistance program that we had launched in the Southern District. And we started to use the efforts and the members of the business law section to expand that throughout the state fairly successfully. And I saw also a true effort to sort of standardize efforts in the bankruptcy courts throughout the state, which I thought was fantastic. So I think this is the only place where we truly make an effort at a very high level to sort of talk about the issues that affect people throughout the state and how to best deal with it. And so I think that was my story in terms of my initial involvement, fairly basic, and then my growth throughout the years in the business law section.
Awesome. And Judge Moore, just to, come full circle on this topic, there's some people who may just kind of be on the line with things, taking a look at the BLS, but not exactly sure as to whether they should pull the trigger on actually joining the section. What would you say to them, those individuals who are contemplating membership?
Look, we hear that one of the real problems with a career as a lawyer is the stress that we're all under and how that can even lead to just burnout. And if there isn't something that sort of takes you away from the pressures of serving your clients, this can just really become, as a profession, a black hole that you start sinking into. But coming to our section meetings, developing substantive knowledge, networking with people, making friendships, this really makes the section a place that enhances what you do on a day-to-day basis in your law office. It's a place away from your law office where you are just in a more relaxed environment, socializing with fellow lawyers from across the state. And I really believe that it leads to much greater work satisfaction. It's not all about the billable hour anymore when you cross from the law office into bar meetings. You are just really focused on dealing with the issues of being a lawyer in your practice area. You're sort of rising above the day-to-day stuff. And so I really believe that for any lawyer, stepping back and sort of looking at the position as a whole and trying to think of ways to make it better are activities that just have to lead to greater satisfaction with the career that you've chosen. And I want to tell you one other thing that it did for me personally. Leza mentioned and Greg mentioned that they got to meet lawyers from around the state, senior practitioners their ages, and really get to know these folks. Well, in my case, yes, it got me out of the Southern District of Florida, the Miami area. I got to meet lawyers from Tampa and Jacksonville and Tallahassee and Orlando, and really spend time with them. And those lawyers, some of them ended up becoming bankruptcy judges. And they are the ones that approached me and said, there's going to be a bankruptcy judgeship coming up, and we really think you should apply for it. We think you've got a really good chance. So who knows, there may be a future judge in our audience right now. And what I'm telling you is, in my case, I do believe that my section membership ultimately led me to the position that I have today.
So that's an excellent story. I want to talk a little bit about the BLS's organization. I know that as a newcomer, when I first came in, it was a little hard to figure out exactly what was what and who was responsible for what. Leza, can you please explain for us how the BLS is organized?
Sure, happy to do that. So the BLS's governing body we refer to it as the Executive Council. And that essentially acts as the board of the BLS. And that board is comprised, or that council is comprised of all of the chairs of each of the substantive committees, each of the standing committees, and each of the task forces that are created along the way for special purposes. So all of those folks serve on our council. Our council is often in the range of about 70 or so people. So it's a pretty large council. And the council is actually governed by the executive committee. And the chair is the chair of both the business law section as a whole, the council, and the executive committee. That's my role right now. And then we have the chair-elect, the treasurer, the secretary, the immediate past chair, and the chair of long-range planning, Mr. Greg Yadley, yours truly, serving on that executive committee. He's probably the one standing member And then the rest of those executive committee members change in their roles and change out over time as new leadership is selected. So that's sort of the executive committee governing the executive council. And then those folks who are on the executive council each have particular roles. So those leadership roles are specific to the committees that they lead. As an example, the substantive committees include substantive committees for bankruptcy UCC that Judge Moore and I talked about, corporations that Greg Yadley has been involved in, intellectual property, computer and technology, business litigation. Those are some of the examples of the substantive committees. Standing committees are other committees that actually help us do the business of the section. And the standing committees include the Long Range Planning Committee, which you'll hear more about from Greg, the Membership Committee, which deals with membership and how to keep and expand their membership, the Diversity and Inclusion, actually it's called the Inclusion, Mentoring and Fellowships Committee. And that committee is focused on diversity and inclusion missions and issues, and also runs a fellowship program that selects fellows from around the state each year to participate in a fellowship program with the section. And so those are some examples of the standing committees. There are various of those. We have also the committee that plans the retreat that Greg was speaking about. So we call that the retreat committee, but several others of those, so that they're not substantive to the practice areas, but more geared toward the business of the section. And then finally, we have task forces, and those are created by the executive council and the chair of the section to deal with particularized needs. As one current example is we have a COVID-19 pandemic recovery task force created during Jay Brown's year last year to address some of the issues on the needs of the members relating to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that task force has been focused on getting information out, providing CLE and education for topics related to the pandemic. And it has been the source of some quality educational programming, as well as a resource page that has all kinds of resources for our members to look to for information relating to courts and other things relating to the pandemic. Like that task force, we have a task force focused on different sections of the Florida statutes. Presently, we have a 541 task force is focused on legislative efforts to change the non-compete statute. We have changes to civil procedures task forces. So it depends on the needs, but task forces, we presently have one also for the looking into the changes that are being proposed for the trust accounts within the Florida Bar. And they're looking at some of those proposed changes and commenting to the Supreme Court. So each task force has specific roles, and there are a number of them. So there are opportunities for engagement and participation at all of those levels for folks. And essentially, each of those typically has chairs, sometimes co-chairs. And then as of recent, we have vice chairs and second vice chairs in an effort to sort of plan more long ranges to the leadership of those groups. So each of those committees and task forces has a leadership within the structure of the committee itself. That is another leadership role and opportunity that exists for members who are participating. Does that make sense, Yutibe?
Oh, it makes perfect sense to me now, especially looking at this chart.
Okay.
But can you just give me an idea as to what is your responsibility as being the chair of the section?
All right, so the chair of the section, one of the responsibilities, which we haven't yet touched on, is the responsibility to plan an executive council retreat. Oftentimes, that is a retreat that takes the executive council out into some other area of the country or even of the world. So some of the places that I've been to with the Executive Council's retreat has been Argentina in Judge Mora's year, Park City and Rick Gross's year, Barcelona and Russ Blaine's year. I mean, there's some really exciting and exotic places where we, as an Executive Council, visit. We explore the legislation and the courts and the processes in each of those places. And we learn and we meet as a council for the Executive Council retreat. So that's one of the roles of the chair. Obviously this year, my role has been sort of a little different than it would have been due to the pandemic. But we're looking forward to having an in-country retreat in Savannah coming up this April. So that's one of the roles. As chair, I chair all the meetings. So this year I'll chair the meetings 2 and through June when the bar year ends. And I chair what I mean by the meetings, I chair the Executive Council meeting, which typically is the last meeting of the round of meetings that the section hosts. And I also conduct routine executive committee meetings, and I chair those as well. I also am involved in a number of different aspects of section business throughout the year and throughout the structure of these committees. I, for example, participate in the legislative committee meetings, which are currently happening every 2 weeks. We meet now by Zoom. And I kind of oversee some of that process, although the legislation committee has its own leadership. So I participate in those various aspects. We are involved also in dealing with all aspects of the Florida Bar and the organization of the events and the planning that goes into CLEs such as this. So I interface quite often with our administrator, Stephanie Zvisco, who started us off today, and also with our webmaster, who is Tracy Eller. She is the one in charge of all our technology and all we put out in terms of content. And most recently, I've been, as chair, pivoting to this digital world and providing messaging to the membership as a whole via both internet means and also writing messages that go out with a newsletter that we've been putting out each week. So my job is basically to oversee what happens over the section for the next, I guess 6 months I have remaining or so of my chair year. And I think the best job I've heard is immediate past chair. So I'm looking forward to kicking Jay Brown out of that role and putting my name in that box.
Well, we will definitely miss you when that time comes. You've been doing an excellent job.
Thank you.
Greg, do you mind explaining for us what is the Long Range Planning Committee and what do you do as chair of that committee?
Sure. The primary function of the Long Range Planning Committee is to assure a strong leadership succession. Under our section bylaws, we also perform tasks and render advice as requested by the Executive Council. So we're a resource. But in order to promote leadership opportunities, we try, as I said before, to have an open invitation and to be very inclusive in all respects. We want the broadest possible representation of the members of the Florida Bar because everybody has to be a member of the bar. So that includes not just geography, which is important, or practice area, which is important, but how we practice too. Lawyers who practice in really large firms have different interests and issues than lawyers who practice in a 10-person firm or have a solo practice. So we try and keep that focus on what Judge Mora referred to as the profession, and leadership is appointed in order to be able to carry out that function. I think Leza did a great job of describing the committees and the task forces, because one of our great strengths is our structure that fosters everything that we try and do. And everybody knows that lawyers have strong personalities. Judge Mora has convinced that hers developed. I think Leza was born full blown as a leader and a strong leader. But this isn't about us when we become a leader. One of the things we stress is that our leadership in the business law section is a continuum, and it starts as a baby lawyer and it continues through being past chair. Which is not to say that Leza or whoever the current chair is just sitting in a seat for a year and that's all that happens. Rather, we have a real approach to the chair, which goes through some of the key committees, such as legislation, and requires you to be treasurer, because finances are very important and we need to understand our finances and make sure that those financial resources are being used to promote our programs. And as secretary, which requires you to pay attention, as has been mentioned several times, well beyond what you do as a lawyer and how you practice to the greater group. So we don't expect a chair to come in and shake things up or change the world. There's a reason that it's a one-year term. And mostly it's because we would love, in a perfect world, to have everyone who cares about our section have the opportunity to be chair. Now that's not realistic, but we do try and provide those leadership opportunities. And when you're chair, it's sort of a reward, but it's more an acknowledgement that you served the profession and your colleagues. So one of the things a chair can do is have a pet project or have an emphasis on something that matters to her. And we've done different things over the years. We've looked at law students and how to introduce them to the section early. We've looked at in-house counsel who, first of all, have to make sure that they're complying with the bar rules and not involved in the unauthorized practice of law, but they're a resource and they're lawyers and they live in our community. So one year that was a project to try and integrate them more. The law schools themselves, our section provides the same sort of outlet that Judge Mora was talking about for lawyers to law professors. We don't want law professors to be in the ivory tower. And one of the great ways that we contribute to that not happening is we invite them to be part of our section, because they obviously know the law, and having them participate in our activities, be it writing or CLE or legislation, they can see the practical side of the law. And it's a real two-way learning street for all of us. One of the things that Leza said with all these chairs and vice chairs and legislative chair, we want people to be able to take ownership of a project. And we'd rather have them volunteer than simply be put somewhere. So we've created positions as people express an interest. We have had new substantive committees that have come online. Intellectual property was something that not everybody on the executive council knew a lot about, but as they became a larger section and became a specialty that had a certification, we all got involved in what that meant and what the examination would be and how you qualify. That sort of cross-pollination helps empower you to be a better leader, but it also makes you a better lawyer because you understand more about the issues beyond your particular practice area and your substantive area. So why don't I pause there? I could go on forever, but essentially the Long Range Planning Committee is there in order to help promote leadership opportunities for as many lawyers as possible.
And that's awesome. I'd like to segue into your individual leadership paths and how you got to becoming chair of the section. Judge Mora, what position did you first hold in the BLS and how did you move up the ladder?
You know, Utiba, it's such a long time ago that I was actually struggling to try to remember what my first position was. But I think that someone tapped me to be vice chair of the bankruptcy UCC section after I had volunteered to speak at a lot of these seminars. And then, you know, of course, after vice chair, you become chair of that committee. And then I figured, okay, well, my leadership role is over. And they said, no, we've got a job for you. And they put me on publications with Diane Wells. And we worked together on putting out the newsletter for the section for a number of years. And then I segued off of that and worked on the retreat committee for a couple of years. And then I had a legislative project that I worked on with some other members of the Bankruptcy UCC committee, dealing with Article 9 and Article 8 of the UCC getting adopted in their revised form in Florida. And from that involvement with legislation, I then got selected to start the path through the executive committee roles and ultimately ended up as chair.
Thank you. Leza, what was your path to becoming the current chair of the committee?
So I was trying to think about whether or not I was, what I did first, but I believe that my initial involvement was with the Bankruptcy UCC committee as well. And in connection with that, I was also very interested in the efforts to diversify and expand inclusion in the section. So I was sort of toggling both the substantive committees and my practice area, which was Bankruptcy UCC, as well as the diversity and inclusion effort. And in connection with my role as the chair of what was then known as the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, we learned that the Long Range Planning Committee had actually had a fellowship program that had been sort of structured, but hadn't taken off. And we asked, as a part of our Diversity and Inclusion Committee's effort, to actually have the Long Range Planning Committee transfer the responsibility of the fellowship program to our committee. And they agreed, and it was approved, and then we were off to the races. And from that very point, we started to essentially make our fellowship program a more robust effort. We actually got the Executive Council to approve funding to provide the stipends for the fellows. And I think in our very first year, we had about 10 fellows, which was great. And then it's been expanding throughout the years since then. And so really, I would say that in addition to my practice area and being involved in various legislative efforts and other efforts throughout the Bankruptcy UCC Standing Committee service, my pet project has been and will be, I think, known as the diversity and inclusion effort for the section. I do think that that is important for our profession, and as business lawyers, it's a key aspect of wanting to have the section look and feel like the communities around us. And I think it's an important effort to empower minorities and other folks that might not think about section membership to get more involved, because I think that will improve our interaction as members of the section, and also improve their lives and their involvement in their profession generally. So that's kind of been my pet project, and that's kind of my trajectory. I also was tapped along the way in that effort to serve as actually as a secretary, and then I've moved my way up to this point as chair.
Great. So Greg, was your path similar to Leza's or Judge Morris?
Yeah, I think so. I mentioned that my involvement came when Steve Roddenberry invited me to a meeting, and at that meeting he asked me to work on something, and I did. And a few meetings later, he said, well, Greg, how about you and Bonnie Roddenberry, another prominent lawyer who happened to be Steve's wife, why don't you two be co-chairs of the committee next year? And we looked at each other and said, okay, I don't know what we're getting ourselves into, but yes. So we did that for a couple of years. And then I became chair of what was then called the Corporations, Banking, and Securities Committee, reflecting the fact that at one time there was a very, very robust community banking community in Florida. About 2/3 of those banks have now been acquired by large banks, but still the same committee. Then after that, my former law partner, Ben Hill, was president of the Florida Bar. And the Board of Governors decided to reinvigorate the Council of Sections. And so Ben asked me if I would help as part of that. So I did. And then I did other sections projects, including bylaws and legislation, and became very involved in task forces after that, that Leza described. One was, we have a continuing series of task forces that work on revisions to Chapter 607, the corporate statute, and that is expanded to all the business entity statutes. So we're always working on a glitch bill or enhancements to keep our legal structure for the state of Florida very competitive with Delaware and any other commercial states. Was also part of the first group that put together an incredibly informative work, standards for legal opinions in business transactions. Phil Schwartz was there also at the very beginning and continues to help lead that effort. Robert Barron is the person leading that now, but we've provided, in effect, a manual for what a legal opinion is in the corporate transactional context. And in a way, it's a primer on what the corporate law is. So that's been a very gratifying process over many years. And then, as with Leza, became Secretary Treasurer, then Vice Chair, then Chair, and then have been very active on the Long Range Planning Committee, which I can talk about a little more later. And I'm very happy to be the chair of that committee now.
Awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about, get more into the details of leadership and how people actually get into leadership roles. You mentioned the Long Range Planning Committee. Is it exclusively the job of the Long Range Planning Committee to pick leaders, or who's really responsible for that?
Well, that's the myth. Of course, I have ultimate power to choose and anoint leaders. Not true at all. Under the bylaws of the section, the Long Range Planning Committee is comprised of former chairs of the section who wish to serve on the committee. So you'd think, given the long history of the section, well, who the heck is that? Since 1969, we've had 51 business law section chairs. 2 are deceased. That leaves 49. Our average attendance at our spring leadership meeting has been slightly more than half of the eligible members. So we're talking about leaders of the section going back to 1969, and almost half of those have stayed involved in the section. So I consider that's enough of a success that for those of you who are investigating getting involved, there must be something good. 500,000 Elvis fans can't be wrong. So what we do, we encourage participation. We keep ourselves well informed of the leadership roles that are being played by our active members, including newer members, younger members. Our social activities really help us do that. We try and make a point of meeting the up and comers, and that aids us in our future decision making. We have an incredibly deep talent bench in the section. So the Long Range Planning Committee makes recommendations which are followed. And the reason they're followed is that we have very open dialogue with the current leaders of the section. So when the Long Range Planning Committee submits a slate of candidates for next year's leadership, that's with the benefit of having spoken with Leza and her predecessor, Jay Brown, and Casey Donlin, who's the vice chair, and the other junior members, to make sure that we recognize people and we don't overlook anybody. So just as an example, at our meeting, which typically happens in the spring as we get ready for the new bar year and the annual meeting in June, 19 members of our section were mentioned as future section leaders. Of that group, a dozen we helped create opportunities for greater leadership exposure, because notwithstanding all these efforts to introduce ourselves to one another and cross-pollinate, with a 70-person executive council and 5,000 members, not everybody knows everybody. So if we've identified a person with great leadership potential, we want to get them exposed well beyond her or his particular committee. We had another 6 people that we deemed not ready for prime time, but were watching and encouraging that participation. So we're talking about more than 24 people that just this year are already on the radar, and that we'll do everything possible to help them continue to pursue their individual goals, to be a leader, and to do that on behalf of all of us in the section.
Lisa, can you give us a little bit more information on what would an individual need to do if, let's say, they joined the organization today and they were interested in one day chairing a committee? What does that process look like?
So I think I would recommend that they absolutely get involved in the practice area where they practice. So the standing committee that addresses their area of practice is the easiest and most direct place to get involved on a substantive level. And then also at the same time do what I did and get involved in some other standing committee of the BLS, for example, membership or retreat, or some of those other efforts that relate to the more sort of social or planning, CLE, for example, some of the other aspects of the section. Doing those in tandem will provide a greater opportunity, one, to expand the knowledge base in your practice area and potentially work on substantive projects that might arise in connection with the practice area, but also provide networking opportunities and opportunities to lead projects outside of the practice area. For example, this same CLE committee, chairs all the CLEs and oversees the CLEs of the entire section. So that's like an example of a standing committee that might be suitable. So it really has to be something that maybe matches your interests and also your expertise substantively. In the substantive standing committee practice areas, you have, for example, issues that come up on a regular basis dealing with some court decisions or new legislation or other projects that the committees tackle along the way. And what typically happens is it's assigned to someone to chair either a study group or other projects, depending on what the issue is. And I think about how it happens in the bankruptcy UCC standing area, because that's where my experience is. But typically it looks like this, a study group is formed to look at the potential changes to the assignment statute as an example. And then someone who brings, the issue to the attention of the chair and vice chair of the standing committee might be tapped to lead the discussions in the study group. And the study group will, a sign-up sheet will go around the table to ask people who are interested in this area to serve on the study group. And then they schedule independent calls to figure out what the next steps are and work together to promote whatever the study group's recommendations are to the standing committee. And I think that's the stepping stone to getting involved in the leadership, is doing something active to work on a project or on an issue that helps your standing committee substantively. And then that gets you sort of exposure to the chair and the vice chair of the committee at that point. And then potentially is recognized as being potentially a leadership role for the future of the committee itself. Similarly, the examples in my instance, for example, in the diversity and inclusion committee what was known at that time, that's how I sort of worked through with my project and the fellows program at that time. And so it doesn't have to be necessarily a project that involves your practice area, but it could be. And it potentially opens the door to, one, you working with other of the lawyers around the table that are involved in that committee, and two, puts you sort of at the forefront, taking a leadership role on a project. And that is a sign of a potential leadership and skill. And so I think that's what I would recommend. In terms of the chairs and the vice chairs of committees as a whole, it is one of the roles I failed to mention of the chair of the section to put together a potential slate that sets out who the leaderships of each of the committees are, and who the second vice chairs in many cases, who typically slate up to the vice chair and then ultimately to chair that committee. And getting on the radar of the leadership of the committees themselves, and then of the chairs or chair elects of the section, is a good way to find a role or a path to leadership. I think that in that sense, the slate, which is proposed by the chair, is usually a collective effort by the executive committee as a whole, and is approved by the long range planning committee. So the more people around those tables you get to know by consistently participating, the better off you will be in a path to leadership. So I think those are the keys I would point out.
Perfect. Thank you, Leza. So I have one more question that I'd like to actually pose to the entire panel, starting with Judge Mora. For someone who's looking to obtain the maximum benefit from their BLS membership, what would you recommend that they do starting today?
Volunteer, volunteer, volunteer. As Leza just said, every single substantive committee is studying issues that come up in their practice area. Offer to participate in those study groups, gain the knowledge of that particular area that's really going to end up enhancing your career skills. It gives you an opportunity to develop relationships with the people that serve in those study groups. You're making friends, and plus you're also giving back to the profession. Trust me, you will be getting back much more than you ever give through the increased enjoyment that you will have with your choice of profession by enhancing the time you spend and the work that you do with this section.
Greg, what's your answer to that question?
Get involved, absolutely, and then think long-term. Don't worry about the immediate payback to your practice. Yes, it takes time. It takes you away from billable hours. I assure you that payback will come, as the three of us, I think, ably demonstrate. Remember, you're part of a profession, and that will be true as long as we make it that way. So we're committed to acting honorably and civilly with one another, sharing our knowledge. And if you become an active participant in the business law section, those values will be continuously reinforced. And as Judge Mora said earlier, we work in a very stressful profession and business, and being able to feel good about that and have the personal satisfactions that come through all of these activities, I just can't overestimate how great it is. So just raise your hand, follow through, and you'll be rewarded.
And Leza?
I would say be consistent in your participation. I think volunteering is good, and consistently showing up is also good. I think that our section meets 3 times a year, our annual meeting in June, our winter meeting usually in January, February, and then our retreat. And obviously the work of the section goes throughout the year, but in those 3 meetings, make sure you come and participate and stay involved, like Greg said.
Awesome. So it looks like we have 2 questions from the participants. It's 1 o'clock, but we can just probably go through these really quickly so we make sure we answer them. Greg, this first one looks like it's best suited for you. The question is, are the people on the list of individuals being watched, and I'm assuming this is regarding to the Long Range Planning Committee, are they notified? And do they get any mentoring from the Long Range Planning Committee?
Yes, no, yes. We don't typically go up to somebody and say, if you do this, you can be chair one day. We do say, thank you for volunteering. Can we help you? Or are you getting out of this what you want? So there's encouragement, but there's not any, we're pegging somebody early on and saying, keep your nose clean and you'll be rich someday.
Okay, and the second question, and Leza, you may be best suited for this one. How does the business law section encourage the current chairs to actively mentor and recruit the next leaders in the various committees?
Yes, absolutely. I think that early on, the chair-elect, this year, Casey Donlan, but certainly last year when I was in this role, starts to ask the current chairs of the committees to start looking out for potential leaders who might be suited to lead those efforts. And so the slate is like a big puzzle. It's not something that can be done overnight. It takes weeks and months to put together. So that process begins many months before, and it's most helpful to have the leadership of each of the committees have input on who the future leaders of their committees might be. So yes, that the answer to that is yes, we do encourage it. We ask that they help identify people and that they mentor people and give them roles. So that happens, throughout the year with the leaders of the standing committees.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Leza. Thank you.
Can I make one more comment, just
yes, of
because it's worth stating, and picking up on what Leza said, we will help you, we will help identify you, but this is really easy. As Judge Morris said, volunteer. Our executive council meetings are open to you. The committee member meetings are open to you. You don't have to sign up and pay a separate fee. So come and watch and see what you would like to get involved in, and then volunteer.
Utebe, I see that there's another question about study groups, and I'd love to answer this question. Virtually every single meeting I go to of the Bankruptcy UCC Committee, there is some new issue that is being talked about. The last meeting, we were talking about a recent 11th Circuit decision.
Do you mind if I read out the question so everyone knows what you're answering?
Sure.
Okay. Well, the question that Judge Moore is speaking to, it says, where do you find the study groups that you were talking about?
So at my last committee meeting, there was an 11th Circuit decision that had just come out, and it raised a question about Article 9 of the UCC and whether a specific provision had to be amended to provide more clarity to the practitioners who regularly file suits in the commercial law area that rely on that statute. And so we ad hoc at the meeting formed a study group to look into that particular issue. There are younger practitioners who just want to enhance their knowledge about the Uniform Commercial Code. There are some more seasoned practitioners, in fact, 2 former chairs of the section who are serving on that committee. My law clerk, who's a year out of law school, is also serving on that committee. And so these study groups are formed, I'd say, at virtually every single meeting of the committees that occur throughout the year. And you just have to attend to see when the study group is formed. And you know what? If a study group has been formed and it's been doing some work, normally they don't wrap up their activities that quickly. So go to a committee meeting, find out about what study groups there are that exist. And if they haven't completed their work yet, volunteer to serve and to see what you can add to the group's contributions to that particular area of law.
Just very quickly, if those of you who are looking for study groups, another way to find them is if you look at on the website, the minutes of each of the committee meetings are on our website, and you can see from the agendas of the meetings and the minutes what study groups are reporting back to the committees. And those are obviously study groups that have already been formed and are reporting, but you might find a guide to what study groups are already in existence by looking on the website in the particular practice areas or committees that you're looking into, and you can find it there.
Greg, did you want to join in on that question or? Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending today's CLE. We love that we were able to share this information to our speakers, Judge Mora, to Leza Blanco, Greg Yadley. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for sharing all of the information about the BLS and the pathway to leadership.
Thank you so much.
Great pleasure. Thank you.